Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Utah State University Center for Persons with Disabilities webinar focusing on the provider transformation. If you've joined us in the past, we've had somewhat of a series with different perspectives in regard to the transformation process. Today, Susan Rinne and I apologize if I didn't say that correctly, Susan, is joining us from Indiana and is going to be providing a perspective through kind of the living supports and the residential focus. And I'm just really excited for everybody to learn from her and her experience and the perspective that she provides. I do want you to take into account that the principles and elements and the pieces that she's going to be teaching, I think, really apply to any setting. But we got a lot of feedback from surveys that people wanted to kind of think about this from a residential living point of view. And Susan was able to provide that for us. So you can pose your questions in the chat box. Susan can see those as well as that I can. And looking forward to an active exchange of dialogue and questions and learning together. So thanks for joining. And Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tricia. Can you hear me okay? Wanted to say thank you to Tricia and Utah State University for this opportunity to talk to you today, and everybody who's joining via the web. This is a new experience for me, so I'm excited to learn more about how to do these kinds of online training. So I hope to be able to do more, so you've helped me kind of to develop this as we go. Just wanted to kind of give you a baseline for what I wanted to cover today. I want to look at kind of 5 areas with you. I want to, first of all, talk about what the elements of organizational change are, what it is you're looking at transforming, and really broaden people's thought processes about what needs to change in any kind of an organizational transformation. And then I'd like to talk more about the process, and a process that maybe can involve and engage stakeholders very early, so to get their involvement, so to ensure we really are listening to the people we support and family members, et cetera, as we make the changes, and going to give you some ideas of things to do and things not to do, honestly. And that kind of leads to that idea of looking at engagement and what are the key concerns, particularly of staff, the people we serve, and families, and ensuring that that is addressed in our change processes. And then I hope to give you an example through the organization that I was with for the last 20 years of a value-based service, and how I think that you can design things to meet both the intent and the spirit of the HCBS rule. And then finally, I'm not going to let the state or funders off the hook because I think we need to look at this from a systemic system-wide approach to service transformation, because you don't make change in a vacuum, correct? You're working within a community, you're working with a set of structures that the state provides you in terms of funding and rules and regulations, and those things need to be adapted and changed as well. So I thought I'd give you a little background just so you know where this comes from and why organizational change has kind of been a focus of mine for many years. I started out in the industry in direct service, and I was frustrated and confused about what we were trying to do and how what I was doing was really going to lead to the goals that people had in their lives. And I kind of learned early that making change requires you to have a vision about what it is that individuals want, and ensuring what we do on a day-to-day basis doesn't conflict with that. In my role, which was a workshop supervisor, I was doing things that just didn't make sense, like teaching people to zip and unzip zippers by zipping and unzipping thousands of zippers that then didn't lead to any outcome whatsoever. And then after being in direct service for a number of years, and then middle management positions, I moved into the technical support role and worked at the university for 8 years. And through an academic kind of approach, learned about organizational transformation. And I had the chance to work with other agencies that were focusing on changing from facility to community-based services. And during that year, I worked with 24 different agencies to shift their service delivery systems. And we were really focusing on facility to employment-based services. But I learned a lot about how hard that is, because I would go in and talk to individuals about what they needed to do differently. And then when I came back about a month later and talked to them about how that went, well, of course, none of those things happened, because everybody was just in the middle of trying to maintain the things that they had already been doing. And introducing new things was much more difficult than I had imagined. And really, very few organizations made that shift over that 8 years. But the ones that did, I realized had strong leaders with a strong commitment and a strong vision for what that was going to look like. So then another thing we did during that time was to survey a number of agencies across the country that had transformed services. And certainly that also impressed me with the amount of and the importance of leadership in the successful transition efforts. So when I became the CEO of an agency in 1998, I was pretty smug about the kinds of changes I think I thought I could make. The organization Life Designs that I came to lead was a small organization and had only been providing residential services. So I thought I could make lots of changes. And I was pretty stubborn and thought that I was going to excel at that. But when I walked in, I realized I had to fill a $125,000 hole in a budget. And so again, I understood that leading change is harder than I thought, when again, things have to be done in the moment. And then finally, the last couple years since retiring, I've had a chance to work with a project called Work to Include. And that's a coalition of individuals with disabilities. And what we're trying to do is help those individuals bring their voice to the table, to policymakers, et cetera. And what I've been learning there is that people really want change and are very, very frustrated by us and our lack of leadership to make those changes at all levels, at the state, within agencies, et cetera. And they really have some great ideas, but have not as much information as I think they should have about what's possible. So hopefully you can see I've worked in this industry for a long time, and I know there's a lot of advice out there, and I understand that that sometimes it gets pretty frustrating, because that advice is is sometimes difficult to operationalize. And I apologize, there's a couple bullets that are here that I'll just read to you and aren't going to show up. So advice, the definition of it: if it's free, it's advice. If you pay for it, it's consulting. And if you can use either one, it's a miracle. So I'm not hoping for a miracle today, but perhaps just some nuggets of information that you can use, and to understand that the advice I'm leaving you with is rooted both in my experience of working with agencies that are undergoing change and actually implementing that in a residential service in a semi-rural area of Indiana. So why is change so difficult? I'm wondering what your thoughts are. If you wouldn't mind entering some things in the chat box, because it probably comes as no surprise to you that transformation is difficult. So what are some things that you think, some reasons you think get in the way of us doing the right thing? Anyone have any ideas? Yeah, I see fear of the unknown. Yes. Too much work. Any others? Thanks, Barbara. You're right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Couple more and then I'll move. Okay, you all nailed it on the head, actually. Change is difficult because, yeah, things are the way they are because they got that way. Sometimes traditions rule. We do things because we've always done things. We don't think about why it is that we're doing a particular thing. That happens all the time in our business when somebody suddenly goes, why is it? And why does it make sense for me to continually teach people a skill that isn't going to have any impact on their ability to live independently, make friends? And why is it we're doing it here as a result of doing it where people are going to need to use that skill? And why aren't we involving the community? So tradition sometimes is a reason why we do things. And then it is easier to do what you know. To change, we certainly have to learn something new. And particularly when we're talking about people who are used to teaching things in a confined environment like the group home where they are able to control things. So moving out and supporting people in individualized settings is much more difficult because in the community, you have to deal with lots of variability, right? And then people do feel a sense of loss and disconnect. I know that in our programs, particularly those people who were working in the group homes, they felt like that change was actually something that devalued the work that they had been doing and the connections that they had. And we know that staff and customers worry that those relationships that they have built are at risks. And then the greater the change, the greater the resistance, right? When we approach change as a huge shift and not as one person and making things work for that person, then the resistance is stronger. So the big announcement, for example, that I'm going to close a group home or I'm going to move a number of people into the community, that actually creates the resistance as opposed to working one person at a time to ensure that you're addressing all their concerns and issues. So, for example, We closed 7 group homes, and I'll talk to you about the process that we used for that, and moved people into supported living settings where they lived with 1, 2, 3 people at the most. And we never said at any point in time we were closing anything. We just worked one person at a time. And then, as someone noted, it's very hard to know that you need to change if you're not aware of all of the options. As I was mentioning earlier in my work with Work to Include, it's been really clear to me that families and individuals with disabilities really don't know what's possible for them. And a survey that Dr. Pat Rogan did of people moving from institutions to the community kind of illustrated the importance of experience in making decisions about and understanding what's possible. So in talking to people who were in institutions about where they wanted to live and what they wanted to do, their number one goal was to move into a group home. And then when talking to people who lived in a group home about what their interests were, their number one goal was to live in an apartment or to live in a home. So as people's experiences expanded, the kinds of things that they wanted to do changed. And we know that. We see that every day. And then finally, I think the big thing, the reason why we have a difficult time with organizations is that, and organizational transformation, that it is really complex. I'm going to talk to you about all of the elements of an organization and what needs to change next. But I think that's one of the things that is often overlooked, is that it's not just a matter of doing things, doing different things, it's a matter of doing business differently. So this is a model that was developed by General Electric, actually, in the 80s and 90s, when they were looking at how to implement large-scale change across the organization. They actually developed this model and a set of processes, some of which I'm going to talk to you about today, and looked at what was all involved in looking at an organization and what all needs to change. So your strategy is the smart design that's here is a block with 3 circles overlapping. One says strategy, what you do, one says systems, how it's done, and one says structure, who does it. And it's all overlaid in the external environment that you operate in. So your strategy, that's your mission, service, and values. And you can change that. You can really focus on a new mission, a new vision for the people you serve, and a set of value statements. And then if you do that, but don't align it with the other elements of your organization, you'll find yourself actually going back and continuing to do the things you were doing before. We have to make sure the other parts change. That alignment is critical. The structure, that relates to how you get things done, who does it. And that includes your staff, your management, your leadership. And in community services, you probably know the structure is much different. There's a lot more decision-making that needs to happen closer to the individual that we support. So you have to build leadership across all positions, not just within the team leader who's in charge of the group home or the manager over several group homes. You've really got to build leadership and an understanding of that within your staff. You have to help each and every staff member become more of a leader at that customer level. And then systems, those are everything that you do within your organization to keep things running. Things like recruitment, reporting systems, performance evaluation, strategic planning, oversight, program evaluation. So all of those things have to change as well. And then, of course, another major influence is the external environment. And that relates to state, federal regulation, communities, everything else. So what you do, your strategy, that the home and community-based services role has defined that very well and looking at what you need to do differently. The elements are clearly identified here. Is it integrated in and support access to greater community? Does it provide opportunities to seek employment and work? Does it ensure the individual receives services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving Medicaid services? Is it selected by the individual from among setting options? Does it ensure an individual's rights? Does it optimize individual initiative, autonomy, and independence? Does it facilitate individual choice regarding services and supports and who provides them? When you think about the elements of that, there's clearly a way to evaluate your organization. And I think you're already doing that, as I understand. And if you've already done your assessment, you kind of know what in terms of your strategy you need to change. You realize where you need to go to the true intent of the rule and to align your entire organization. The assessment informs your need for change. But then how does that look? So I would argue that you really need to think about how this focuses on how you communicate what you do, where you provide the services, right? And how you plan with individuals. So if you look at the guidelines, they make clear that individual planning is individual planning, right? When people live together, go to the same church, go to the same day program, eat the same meals, then how can we possibly say there's individualized planning going on? So we really see the results of our strategies in the outcomes for the people that we support. So to change, we have to evaluate what the end goal is of our services and supports and develop a new vision. And when you begin with that end in mind, it's a lot easier. In our organization, we shifted all of our planning mechanisms to a system called PATH that was developed by John O'Brien and Associates. And you may be familiar with that, but the thing that we really liked about that process was it helped to develop that vision for each and every person. So it made clear then how that disconnected maybe with the kinds of things that we were doing on a day-to-day basis. This made clear, what we as an organization also needed to do. So we started looking with different eyes. On the right side of this slide, you see a quote from Pablo Picasso. There's only one way to look at things until someone shows us how to look at them with different eyes. That individualized planning process really did that for us. So until we asked Anthony, where do you want to be in the future, no one knew that Anthony really wanted to live in a whole different town from where he was living. And that town was closer to his family and friends. So until we asked the question, we were doing things that made no sense for Anthony. So it really focuses you on services and supports and not programs and buildings. You forget on a day-to-day basis when you're trying to maintain those structures how important it is to maintain the supports to each person in that structure. So again, you really focus on individual directed planning, not meeting requirements. Where do we find the money, not how do we pay for it? One of my favorite quotes is Charles Hopkins, who said, do the right thing and the money will come. And I've always been called Pollyanna about that, but hopefully I'll show you some information that will show you that really does work if you take that approach. And so we look at, as a result of those changes, that individual success is based on independence, level of independence, employment, relationships, and participation in the community. And so that's what drives the planning process, not last year's goals. And I don't know about you, but most annual case reviews that I've sat in on over the years really weren't an effective way of helping somebody move forward. Really, that individual planning process where they have people that they want to have involved are the only ways that we really do find those things out we need to find out to support people. So often it's clear what we need to do, as I said, again, really one person at a time, looking at individual goals. But then we don't think about that everything else needs to change as well. How that change impacts our staffing patterns and management structure, how that change impacts our continuing education, etc. So when you've made the shift and started thinking about individualized supports, then you have to think about how those things change. So first and foremost, recruitment. One of the things that I think is critical is to start thinking about direct service professionals, not caretakers. And it really is hard to move away from that focus. Oftentimes we recruit and we bring in people who are interested in taking care of individuals, but that isn't really a good fit with our need to help people be educated, challenged, and supported in the community. It helps to emphasize the role differently, that the role is actually teaching, supporting, and advocating with individuals. And honestly, one of the things that we found is that people in our community anyway were more interested in those kinds of positions than they were in caretaker positions. And when we recruited individuals in that way, with that kind of message, we actually got people who were more likely to stay, as hard as it is these days to even get people. And then training, you have to think about how you train people. So you have to emphasize those individual outcomes, and you have to make sure that you're training people to teach utilizing systematic instructions, along with the requirements that the state has put on you, things like medication administration, health and safety, etc., to make teaching as important as those things. Otherwise, it's difficult for people to make decisions in the field and may likely revert back to that caretaker role. And then recognition. When individuals that you support succeed, that means that the staff that are supporting them succeed. So instead of giving people acknowledgement or recognizing people for just keeping people safe, we have to recognize those achievements And in order to recognize those achievements, you have to have ways of gathering that information, right? So we have to change systems so that we can do that. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's often, we emphasize in our training and our recognitions more that, you know, is everybody okay? And we worry more and pay more attention to those incident reports. Not that we don't need to do that, but it shouldn't be the only way that staff hear from us. And then finally, we need to look at how people are supported. We need to teach and expect leadership as well. In our organization, we used a leadership team that I'll talk about here in a little bit. Is comprised of direct service staff, middle management staff, and upper management staff. And in that environment, everybody was a leader. And they were all expected to take information on a regular basis back to the teams that they support. So everybody was considered in a role that they represented the organization and were critical to the change that we were trying to implement. So when I talk about systems, the picture here on the right, it's a quote in it says, "You're not lost, you're here." So systems are the things that keep the organization moving and understanding where it is and what it's trying to accomplish. Again, when you're going through transformation, planning is critical. We have to help people to see a clear vision by enabling them to look at the possibilities. As we said, individuals with disabilities often don't know what the possibilities are. Staff don't as well. So involving staff and going out and looking at what's there, what's possible. So again, one of the things that we did as an organization early on is we sent staff to a lot of organizations around that we know were doing good things and that were much farther along in terms of providing individualized supports. And they brought that information back and shared it with the organization, with their teams. It's a lot more powerful. And then again, it was helpful for them in that process as we were planning to make any changes. So we help people to develop a clear vision, again, by enabling them to see what can be. And then we can set goals based on that vision. We see where we want to go and compare where we are. Makes it really easy to see what needs to happen in the middle. Again, if I go back to the path process and how that works, you set a vision, you talk about where things are, and then that builds tension because you're able to see clearly the kinds of steps that you need to take to move forward. And you can't do that, again, and have your budget still reflect other realities. So you know that your budget reflects your agency's values, where the organization puts its resources. You have to remember that there are some programs that are going to run a deficit, right? But if that's the direction you're headed, then you remind people that's the direction you're headed and that's a priority for your organization. In our organization, we actually were in a position where supported living was supporting a lot of what we were doing. So it was easier, I think, for us to say this is the direction we're headed. So I know that that's a difficult thing when your group homes are making money And you're going to have to use those dollars sometimes to support other deficit programs. Evaluation systems, that's, I think, one of the easiest things to change. So your success is your customer success, right? Other businesses know that. Why don't we? I don't remember when I've had a state agency ask me what my customer outcomes were. Usually they asked me, are you in compliance with these particular requirements, or what's the number of incidents reports that you had in this area? Why don't we focus in again on what we're achieving for people? So outcomes like achieving community goals, learning new things, participation in the community, employment, money, expanding networks. Those are just a few of the measures that we can use to evaluate whether we truly are meeting individualized goals. And then HR systems, actually, all of your HR systems change. Look at your job descriptions, and how do your job descriptions talk about what you do as an organization? You can clearly outline for staff what those fluffy words mean. We did that, and we put our values in every single person's job description, from direct service to the executive director. So some of the things that we included were things like the ability to change. And we told people that what we wanted to see is that they continually sought out and utilized best practices. So stretch themselves, learn. Teamwork, we ask people to respect and utilize the talents of others, and provide leadership through cross-training of direct service staff. Vision, we ask people to believe and display a commitment to the organization's vision and values, and to serve as a bridge builder to connect people in their community. In terms of customer service, we ask people to regularly seek feedback and input from customers and deal with complaints in a consistent, timely, and professional manner. And then finally, one of the other items we had was advocacy, to encourage continuous involvement by communicating and interacting with all members of the individual support team. So those are all the things that you need to change. And that is a process that takes quite a while. In the survey that Dr. Rogan and I did in 2011 of 35 agencies, we found that that transformation process happened in an average of 9 years. And most said that definitely that their changes were not over. They continued. So I don't want you to think that it's something that I think is easy, or something that I think takes a short period of time. It really is a process. And so I wanted to describe a systematic process for making those changes and thinking through how to make those changes. So you probably have all looked at some of the academic information on organizational transformation. Most of it takes a stepwise process. This diagram that you see is an arrow pushing forward. On the back end is developing a sense of urgency. In the middle is getting people involved, mobilizing commitment. And then at the end is making it stick. And then you're done, correct? Again, as I said, no, you're probably never done. But this is something that was developed from early research back in the 50s. And Generally, they talk about this in terms of unfreezing the organization, getting it unstuck, moving it forward, making the change, and then putting it back together in terms of aligning all of those things we just talked about, the strategy, the structure, and the systems. Of the hundreds of agencies that we've talked to, they all used a similar process. And they may be called things different, but large-scale change always involves this process that must be managed, evaluated, and tweaked. So again, the first step is to unfreeze the organization. You need to develop that compelling need to change, as we talked about. That's one of the things that makes change so difficult. And this is the important work of getting everyone to understand where the agency is headed. It literally involves drawing a picture in words and images about what you're trying to achieve. And as difficult as that sounds, it sometimes ends up being very simple when you put the words together. But it truly then clarifies the vision of the end state for everyone, the people you serve, families, and staff. And then next, mobilizing commitment involves engaging all those stakeholders in plans. And I'll talk a bit more in a second about some of the things that get in the way of people's involvement and some strategies you can use. And then finally, aligning all of those things to make sure they're consistent. While it's complex, again, we can learn from others' success. And we look at transformation processes across business. On the right here, you see a few bullets about a study that was done by McKinsey in 2011, about the same time as the survey that Pat and I did, talked about what business transformations looked like and what were key elements of those transformations. They surveyed 2,500 CEOs, and that represented a range of regions, industries, specialties, etc. And the question about that they asked those people were, what were the key elements of success? And so the items on the right are the things that they talked about. First and foremost, to define the change clearly. We talked about already how important it is to develop that vision. Secondly, then look at what are the capabilities and mindsets of the stakeholders that you're working with. And we'll talk more specifically about each of those here in a second. And then engage employees as early as possible in the planning process. And that actually was indicated to be a huge factor in success of transformation. So one of the things that Pat and I found that there was a 70% chance of success for transformations that involved frontline staff. Could the same be said for involving families, people with disabilities, and communities? So when frontline staff and management both take the initiative to drive change, what we found is that the success rate improved to 79%. So why not? And then transforming that leadership capacity involves teaching people these change processes and teaching people how to support that. 3/4 of the transformations that McKinsey, et cetera, talked about were successful because they broke the process down in clearly defined initiatives, and they celebrated success along the way. One of the things that is very helpful is to communicate and celebrate success and focus on those positives early in the process. So again, that's the same kind of thing that Pat and I found when we talked to leaders in our field, that they looked at the environment, they developed that vision and value for the future and communicated that. They mobilize commitments through things like a leadership team, which is a cross-agency structure to help in the planning and implementation of change. They got the board involved and educated early, and then they involved the community. And then they aligned everything that they did with that change. They set goals, and then they monitored progress on a regular basis. So critical to success is providing with people with a good picture of why change. So figuring out literally where the agency is headed. What are some things that you think might be some compelling reasons for an organization to shift its service delivery system? If you would, put your answers in the chat box now. So why should people change? If your residential program is doing well, knowledge is the key to success. You're right. Improving services to help better the lives of the individuals we serve. Thanks, Amber. A couple more. Yeah, you can always find something new and value different perspectives. Yeah, everyone should always keep evolving. Yeah. So you're right. You're right. In terms of helping people to develop the reasons to change, there are lots of them. Oftentimes, change happens as a result of outside forces. Right? We know that right now, we're being required to comply with the HCBS rule, and we really have to look at how that has to make a difference in what we do on a day-to-day basis. So they are making us do it is oftentimes something that we say to our stakeholders. But that's not such a great reason for the change. But it's the right thing to do for the people that we support. It's something that you want the leadership within your organization to adopt and adhere to. For people that receive services, you want to look at what it is that they want. And again, as I noted earlier, people with disabilities really want to live full lives in the community. We know that. So shifting our organizational structures so that we're able to comply with that just only makes sense. So we know there are better ways to get the job done. But oftentimes we are not necessarily pushed to adopt those best practices. But if we know it can be done and others are doing it well, we know that people can live independently regardless of the severity of their supports. We worked with an organization out of Madison, Wisconsin, which provided electronic support or electronic monitoring services. And initially, I thought that that was only going to work with individuals with more mild disabilities who would be able to not have staff on a regular basis overnight. What I found after we implemented it and looked at across a number of individuals providing that service was that people with even the most significant supports could benefit from not having staff sitting on their couch all night. And I can talk more about that at some other time. That's a whole nother presentation about how we implemented that. But it just goes to the fact that I knew that I didn't know that it would work until I talked to the people in Wisconsin who told me about all of the people that they were serving who had fairly significant supports who were still utilizing a monitoring service so that they didn't have to have staff 24/7. Poor quality services and outcomes. If we're truly monitoring the services and supports we're doing, we know that people don't get to the place that they want to be as often as we'd like to have that happen. And we know that there are ways to make that happen better for people. So this is one of my favorite quotes here. Visions are exhilarating. They can create the spark that lifts an organization out of the mundane. The best reason that I've found to help across stakeholders, honestly, for how to make that change is that it is better for the individuals that we support and it's what they want. You can get everybody on the same page with that kind of approach. So I wanted to talk about the stakeholders that are involved in this and what you might do to work with each stakeholder group. And the things that you need to do first and foremost is to really think through what might be their attitude toward the change that you're making. Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to need help with it? Or do they truly understand what you're trying to do? What is it that they need in terms of information, and how is it best to provide that information? Sometimes the information is best provided face-to-face. Sometimes you can utilize written communication. Understand how influential they might be on the things that you're trying to accomplish. We know that the individuals that we support, sometimes we minimize their influence, and they can have a huge impact when they start talking about the success in their lives. And then identify strategies for each. So the particular stakeholders that I wanted to address were your board, your customers, the people you support, the state, your funders, your staff, people in the community. So again, I'll kind of summarize some of the information that we found from our survey of the CEOs that transformed from facility to community-based services. And while we haven't done a survey like this with residential services, I'm pretty sure the information is going to be very similar. So number one, staff. We found that 71.8% of people said that staff largely embraced the change. I can tell you in our organization, when we started shifting the service delivery system from group homes to supported living services and holistic services, that was exactly what I found. Most of the staff were there. Some, again, were truly invested in the model that they were working in. But honestly, most were concerned with and supportive of the idea that people would do better if they had more individualized supports. And so that's one of the pieces of information that we were sure to share with people, is how we knew that from research and from experiences going to visit agencies that had um, moved to supported living services. We were able to help them see not only the improvements in people's lives, but how it would affect them most directly. And so in terms of influence, of course, they are the change. They're the people that you most need to enlist initially and to ensure have the training and support they need to make things, to shift that system. And then the strategies that you would employ with people, with staff, first and foremost, engagement. You're going to see that a lot in these slides. We had staff on our leadership team, direct service staff on our leadership team, helping to just define the vision, to implement and develop and implement the plan, and then to assess it on an ongoing basis. So they were involved day one and on an ongoing basis. But honestly, we really looked for staff that we knew were going to be able to make the shift that we wanted to make them. And really focused on bringing them to the table. Because one of the things you'll probably know already is that there are people that may want to be involved only because they want to slow things down. So be very careful of that. We always talked about our leadership team as a coalition of the willing, the people who are already there so that they could help bring other people on board. So engagement is critical, providing lots of information and helping them to see different things, mentoring people, providing them with support through the process, making sure we were clear about expectations by incorporating that into all of our systems for program evaluation, for individual recognition, for how we evaluated their performance. And then we did recognize that there are a group of people that just aren't going to be comfortable and that they need to maybe look for other opportunities. We had one gentleman in particular who we were able to talk to about maybe this wasn't the right fit for him at this point in time because he was not going to be there. He was not going to support any kind of shift for the people that he knew and worked with. Because again, I think he had the right motives. Maybe he was concerned about them and their safety in the community. But we were wanting him to shift the thinking process about how we can keep people engaged and involved in the community and safe at the same time. So again, we helped a lot of these staff see what could be by pointing them to places that were already way far down the road. We visited a place in California, Wisconsin, New York, Florida, and then we brought people to us too to talk about it. Because one of the things that I think was very fascinating is as people were moving and talking to people in supported living settings, it was obvious that it was so different everywhere you went because we're talking about individual services. The board, I actually found the board to be incredibly supportive and focused because they're so concerned about our mission that once you let them know how it's going to improve people's lives, they literally are on board. In my experience, the board was the most supportive and the most interested. One of our board members, and our board members, by the way, were family members and people with disabilities and community members. But our bylaws require that people with disabilities or family members made up 51% of the board. So it wasn't just community members, it was people who had a real stake in the services that we were providing. So they're really focused in on what it's going to mean to the organization's survival. They are there in their fiduciary capacity to make sure that the organization continues. So one of the things that was very helpful for them to think about was the fact that this shift is happening all across the country, and that by taking the lead, we were actually going to be better positioned in the future to support people. They were really interested in what's happening across those trends and what, again, how will it impact the people that we serve? And of course, they have a huge amount of influence. They can make it happen, or they can say, no, that's not happening here. So we spent about a year working with our board, bringing in people from around the country again to talk to them about exemplary services and what the future held for services like ours. So that strategic planning process that we went through with the board and included our staff and customers was a very critical in helping people to see a different future and then be involved directly in how that rolled out. Again, we provided them with lots of information, but we also set our goals with them and started monitoring our success and reporting that back. So that, again, had a huge impact on their support for the efforts that we were making when they saw that people were getting jobs, people were living more independent lives, people had their own homes. So the individuals that you serve, again, I think I mentioned earlier that they really are there already. They are very frustrated, have been, the people I've spoken with are very, very frustrated by a service system where they don't necessarily have the ability to move when they want to move, where they want to move. And the majority of people, once they make those changes, they don't want to make it. They don't want to go back. So, of course, they're more interested in how it will affect them. And that's what's important, is to talk about the services and supports that they're going to need to be successful, not how this big organization is going to move forward. So one person at a time is the best way. And they can have a significant impact and can sell it to other people. So the first person who was elected to get electronic monitoring service. Oh, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it's support through electronic means to live more independently, to not have staff, but to have staff available 24/7. So the first person who jumped in and said, I want to do that, was a young woman. And the first night that she didn't have staff, that she had access to that system, she came to my office the next day and was so excited that she spent the night by herself for the first time in her 35 years. And that was the message that she gave everybody. And so that and her family's influence had significant impact on the next 10 people that signed up for that. And so they need practical information. Again, how's it going to impact me? Are there other people doing it, and can I connect with them? Can I try it out? And that's one of the hardest things for moving to more independent living environment, because people aren't necessarily given the opportunity to try living, on their own. It's not easy to make that happen. So one of the things that we would do is support people to, spend a few days with somebody who, with their approval, of course, who's willing to have that person live with them for a few days just to see what that's like. Again, that's one of the harder things to do, is just to provide people with that experience, because it is such a commitment. And then it's important for people to have that person-to-person connection with somebody who has lived on their own, and to provide kind of a opportunity for people to talk to each other about it. Families, you probably know, their concern is that the individual be safe. And one of the things that families said really was that the person was happier once they were living in a smaller setting. I found that almost person after person. There was a gentleman that lived in a group home for a number of years, and his family was fairly happy with that situation, and then decided maybe they would try, that Brian would try living in a smaller setting with a couple of other people. And they were ecstatic when they looked at how much more Brian was able to do, because he wasn't tied to the activities and the structure of that group home. And as a result, Brian, they said, was much happier. And he's someone who doesn't necessarily tell you that, but he tells you that with his smile. So again, they're very difficult to convince. And they're going to be the first to say, well, wait a minute, we've talked about different things over the years, and how is this different from what we're doing now? So we really need to help them see what's out there and what's possible. Because families really haven't had a chance again to experience the other kinds of supports that might be available to them in the community setting. So they can have a significant impact on other families one way or another. So enlisting family members that are supportive and having them talk to other families is really one of the best strategies. And just a big admonition I have here is, again, not to have group meetings where you talk about how you're going to make these significant changes, because oftentimes that just creates resistance. And it doesn't allow you or enable you to talk to each and every family member about what their concerns are, so you can address those. So across all of those areas, again, engagement is a common theme. Getting everyone involved early is critical. People don't resist change, right? They resist being changed. And many successful transitions, including ours, began with developing a planning team. So that's the leadership team I talked to you about earlier. So this is a strategy to employ to think about, how do we get all of those people involved in helping us to develop a vision, to develop a plan, to monitor that, and to continue to move forward. So the leadership team is a cross-functional, includes customers, direct service staff, managers, board members, if you like. We didn't necessarily have our board at our leadership team meetings, but we reported the leadership team meetings to the board. So they were involved at that level. And the purpose of our group, this is the purpose statement that we came up with. was to imagine, develop, and initiate customer-directed services and communicate that vision. Our goals were to imagine how to improve services, to develop strategies for implementation, to initiate activities to get change in motion, communicate to all. So it was critical, that group of 20 people, to helping us think through how do we move this organization to do something important. And the other thing that does is to teach leadership among that group of people. It's this quote on the bottom: you get the best efforts from others not by building a fire beneath them, but by building a fire within. And that was the advantage of that leadership team. And it is so important that there is leadership at all levels and everybody's able to communicate what it is you're trying to achieve. There's been lots of studies done on the importance of leadership. And this set of roles comes from a study that was done by Oleg and Bertson back in 2010. They found that support for a leader has a lot to do with people's involvement in and support for change. And then another study was done recently, also looked at the causes of and failure rates of transformation efforts and tied a lot of it back to weak leadership. So a leader who him or herself does not believe in the change is going to have a difficult time inspiring others, right? And it's going to be difficult for that person to communicate with some of those stakeholders that are so important to hear consistent messages. So we really need to spend some time engaging people in the organization to understand what their roles are, that they need to sponsor the change, they need to be an advocate, they need to be a role model in terms of making sure that they're willing to walk the walk and talk the talk, that they're doing direct service and showing people how to do that in the community. They make decisions that have a huge impact. As managers, leaders control resources. And so they need to prioritize how those resources are used that support the change. They are the face and the voice of change. They have to communicate that regularly. And then they have to engage people across they have to engage and motivate the people that they oversee and offer recognition to recognize the changes that people are making. And then finally, the hardest one, I think, in our field sometimes is to hold people accountable. One of the things that we did was look at and start collecting customer outcome information by service area, by team manager, and then feed that back to them and recognize those people who were doing well and support those people that weren't. So again, this slide talks about avoiding frustration. Frustration is trying to find your glasses without your glasses, right? We know that happens. And I just thought I would talk about some more strategies for when you're banging your head against the wall, which is the picture on the right here. Funding. So oftentimes our funding is kind of dragging from our shifts and doesn't necessarily support the things that we want to be doing differently. So we were able, again, to go to the state and advocate for a change in funding that allowed funding to follow the people from the group home into the community. But we also needed some transition funding, which we were able to look at, what other kinds of things can we do? What other kinds of funding can we capture? to help us in the transition. And we were able to get some grant funding in some instances. Diversifying funding is also an important thing, looking at are there dollars that you can bring in that will help support the change effort. And our experience, we were able to add affordable housing services, which followed along with our mission, allowed us to provide more individualized support for people by helping people move into apartments, but also provided some additional funding for the organization, as we were also providing that same service to people who didn't have disabilities. And so we're able to integrate those settings. And again, resistance, you want to look at how do you focus on staff, board, family, customers. Lack of support for leaders. It sounds like you are reaching out to each other and developing that support. And that really is wonderful. I know in our state we used to have that, but don't have that right now. And it really is very helpful for people to be able to talk to other leaders about what they're going through and hearing how they're dealing with those things. We used to have organizational transformation forums on a quarterly basis, and those were wonderful and well attended. And if you have limited experience with the change process, of course, what you can do is just learn from each other, but also reach out and look at what other organizations have done. I've got a list of resources at the end that might be helpful for you. So finally, I wanted to just talk a minute about our experience in a little more detail. So the organization partners with people of all ages and abilities to lead meaningful lives. We spent a lot of time educating, as I've talked about already. We relied on experts. We got everybody involved. We worked with community leaders to see how we could not just address the needs of the people we support, but address local needs, and that's where housing came from. We used a planning group comprised of all our stakeholders. Our goals are simple. This is us. We wanted to make sure that the people that we support lived in their own homes, worked in regular community businesses, and are members and contributors in their community. And we honestly did that and focused on getting everyone involved in that. And that's probably the biggest change that we made as an organization, is by saying to people, it's not this program's responsibility to get people jobs. It's not that program's responsibility to help people be more independent in the community. It's everyone's responsibility. And so as a result, Marvin, who was someone who moved from an institution into a supported living environment, had lived in an institution for 20 plus years, was looking for a job. His staff and he spent every Tuesday at a restaurant, Taco Tuesday, right? And when he was looking for a job, the staff member mentioned it to staff, or to the staff of the restaurant, and guess what? That's how Marvin got a job. He was in for 5 years. And people have really simple dreams, right? One of the things that we did with a woman who lived in one of our group homes was to ask her through that path process, where do you want to be in 3 years? And she simply said, I want a home, I want a rocking chair, I want a dog, and I want a job. So that makes it really easy for us to determine success, right? And then there's John. John lived in an institution for a number of years, and then he moved into one of our group homes, and he was happy as a clam, didn't want to move. Unfortunately, that was one of the first group homes that we shifted to supported living services, and everyone else in the home wanted to move. And so we finally had to talk to John about, you got to, because we really can't keep this group home open for you. So John went to live with one of his group home roommates in the community. And when I went to meet him at his place, he took me over to the window, opened the window, and said, "Look at that." Across from him was the pool with lots of young ladies around the pool. And he looked at me and went, "I could never see this before." And then within just a few weeks of moving out on his own, he came and said, after years of being in the sheltered workshop, "I want to go to work. Can you help me find a job?" So it's just an example of how it's really easy when you think about it, just in terms of what people want. So it really is worth it. Your goals then are focused on outcomes. More people have real jobs. In fact, in our organization, 37% of the people that we supported had jobs, which compared to 26% for people who were statewide. We were just beginning to help people get self-employment and making sure that happened for more people. We wanted to ensure that the people that we support that still lived at home with their families then had experiences like every other teenager and helped to support people to try out things so that they did have that experience. Employers value people as part of their work environment. People have money. People have their own homes. 74% of the people that we supported lived in their own home or apartment. Our funding really supported all of those things. And that with a planning process that focuses on individuals, there are no dead ends. So we're proud that 95% of the people that we surveyed every year said that services have made a positive difference in their life. And the majority of them said that they are satisfied with services. This is just a then and now. And I want to get to questions. So these are a few tips for you. Again, the good news is that it works. Staff, family, people with disabilities, and the community are more supportive of our organization than when I first started. And then I'll leave you with this and then open it up for questions. You really do have to have an environment that supports your efforts for transformation. So funding and policies also have to focus on the same things you're focusing on. So funding needs to look at outcomes versus process versus programs. Funders need to pay more for what they want. And then they need to look at, are there disincentives? Are there things that are keeping things the way they are? And make sure they're freeing those things up. Policies, those all have to change too. Again, that has to focus on those outcomes. And once that happens, it makes it a lot easier for you to communicate to other people about how things are happening in your organization and how that compares. So with that, sorry for going so long, but I wanted to open it up for questions.
Well, people are typing in the chat box. I was just going to ask you a question, Susan, on your slide about providing services to teenagers or transition age youth, and that looked like typical. Can you speak to a little bit more about that? I don't know that everybody on the webinar today provides services to transition age youth, but it's certainly something that we want to be thinking about and what that could look like.
Oh, sure. About 30% of the people that we serve lived at home with families and were under the age of 18, but were receiving Medicaid waiver support. So one of the things that we did was work with the school systems to ensure that we had a coordinated planning process and communicated really clearly with each other about kids that were in that transition process that we were supporting. So we were able to look at the living side of things, and they were really focused on the employment outcome side of things. So it really enabled us to ensure that we were supporting what they were doing and vice versa. And so we really focused our efforts on helping families and young and youth to look at what the living options were for them, as opposed to oftentimes, again, families think that group homes are it. So we really communicated that with them and helped by starting planning very early for with families about where that their son or daughter was going to be after they left school.
That's great. Thank you. I don't know if you could see Amber just typed a question.
I did. Yes, we provide multiple services, all of those. We started out as just a residential program, and over time, again, as a result of moving to more a holistic approach, we added residential services. And we added a service that we called continuing education. And so both of those services were funded through a variety of mechanisms. Employment was supported by vocational rehabilitation and waiver, and ticket to work. So one of the ways that we looked at, again, braiding those services is by ensuring that everybody knew that they needed to communicate and to work together. And so the teams were comprised of all of those entities, and the residential staff were also, again, supported to help people get and keep jobs the way that people in employment programs were expected to also support people in the community in other ways other than employment. So I think the buy-in from working together was just a matter of bringing all of those people together during that planning process that I talked to you about. And as I noted, one of the things that is in our job description is a requirement that people do that. And annually, when people had their performance evaluation, that was one of the things that was assessed, is how well do you work with other team members.
Any other questions? I don't see anybody typing in the chat box. So I'll just go ahead and I'll kind of pay attention as well, but I'll go ahead and thank everybody for joining us. And thank you, Susan. I think you really just laid the framework well in terms of the planning pieces that you did, and then just also how your organization provided those services. Is there anything else you want to add? I know that you said that you had some slides or some information at the end. People have some follow-up.
No, I think that I just would leave you with this one. That you should, the first and foremost is to believe that transformation is possible, because when you stop believing in Santa, you get underwear for Christmas.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody. Please take time to click on the survey link and give us feedback. We really value that in terms of upcoming training, and then also feedback for Susan. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks to everyone.